Hello and welcome to my first go at trying to do a React. Can we do this in React Web? People might be familiar with the Can It Be Done in React Native series, which is great. And so I have often found that some of the web animations that people are doing aren't as interesting. So I wanted to see, can we do some of those cool native animations in React Web. First one I'm going to have a go at is one that I saw on Can It Be Done in React Native, which is this Spotify animation. Haven't got my phone connected, and actually the Android one's slightly different to the one, but if you check the link in the description you can see what it's meant to look like. So this is essentially on the right what we're aiming for. It might be familiar to some people from the Spotify iOS app. The Android one has a slightly different animation, but when we scroll down we get that effect. So the image is fading out, this text is also fading out, and we have a replacement header text coming in at the top, and the shuffle button is moving up with the scroll until it hits the top. If I look at this in mobile mode, so I reduce the top height a little bit, then we can see that the shuffle play button becomes fixed at the top, but we continue to scroll underneath. So to get started on this, do most of this in using a full thing when I was first investigating how to do it. So I'll also have another window open in full screen with mobile mode just to get better access to DevTools, but hopefully this way you can see what's going on. So I've got a quick basis of the layout. Obviously it doesn't do any of the animations when we scroll. I'll just quickly go through. So this is based on Create React App, but just with style components, React Spring and React Use Gesture, which we're going to use for the animations but not using yet. And pretty because I like it. So app, we just have our album shape, which I copied straight from the Can We Do This in React Native, and we pass it into our album component, which actually has the full effect. The body and everything else is set to height 100%. So our album component, we have the container that contains the whole lot. The cover is managing the just the image. The collapsed header is the header for when we are collapsed, which is currently this 0.5 opacity box with the smaller text in. Shuffle play, which is the shuffle play button, and content, which is everything that actually scrolls. This is all within a Flexbox container using relative and flex direction column. So these are the standards in React Native for a view, and we're going to use some position absolute. So you'll see a lot of position relative. So if we dive into the first of these items, we have the cover. We're just passing in the image as a prop, and so we can look at this. So as I said, lots of position absolute. I've just extracted this into a reusable chunk because I'm going to use it a few times. And the height of this is this constant of the expanded header height plus twice the button height, and we're using as a flex box just to center the image horizontally and cutting off any overflow to the sides, and the image is sized to fill the maximum height of this box. Got a one for now, fixed, constant. That's one that we're going to be wanting to play with later. If we look at the collapsed header at the moment, so we're just passing in the name of the artist as a prop. So the container, let's make this better with this. I'm typing this out again. So we have the height of this is this constant, which is the collapsed header height, and it's got a black background. Z index of 1 to bring it in front of make sure it's in front of the image, and then this is just to make sure to place the text nicely in the middle, with a bit of padding, and just some formatting on the text. Next, for the button, so we've got the button height and width as constants because we're going to want to use them elsewhere. So height and width being set, and the colour and the border radius to get these nice rounded corners is half the button height. This is just removing some of the default formatting on a button. And again, we are position absolute, which just removes us from the flexbox flow, because we're going to position this with a CSS transform. So currently we are transforming this to be down by the height of the expanded header, but then back up by the half of the button height, so that the center line of the button is at the bottom line of the expanded header. And the most interesting of these children is the content. So this is the only one that allows an overflow, which gives us our scrolling. We're hiding the scroll bar just for consistency with the on Firefox, which doesn't do the overlay scroll bars. And this is filling the remaining any flexbox area that we've got, and the children of it, which are the expanded header and the track listing, are both flex children, with a bit of padding on the top of the flex children, and then track item is a bit less interesting. I'm going to put all of this in this is all going in the git commit history, so you'll be able to see all of this anyway, but this is just a simple multiple set of flex boxes laying out these items. So now we're going to start to think about how to animate this. So the thing that's actually going to drive our animation is the scrolling. So we're going to want to be setting a variable from the scroll position, and then going to be using that to drive the opacity of the two different bits of the header and the position of the button. We could use React state, but that would force each change in the scroll position to be a new React render. So we want to bypass that, which is why we're using React Spring and its animated support. So the first thing we want at this parent component level is a variable to store the scroll position. So we're going to use Spring, which is from rack spring. And we want the argument, we're going to use the function version of the arguments for this to create a variable y of 0. And this is a hook, so we're going to use destructuring to pull out this. So this would the first thing that we could destructure out of here would be an object with y as a property, but we can just destructure out y and set y, which is our function to update it. You may not have come across this version of this function version of useSpring before. It's handy because we're going to be updating the spring with driven from our scrolling. So the scrolling is all in content, so we're going to want to pass these down to it, and there we go. So then if we go into content, so content is now receiving y and set y. So we're going to use React use gesture to give us ourselves a nice gesture handler, which works really nicely with React Spring. So if we go and have a look at React use gesture, here's a simple example. So this one's using use drag rather than use scroll, but that's okay. And it returns bind, which we just put on a component, and see how this guy is using set handler. We're getting that set handler, we're going to use exactly the same. So let's go back to our code. We get use scroll imported from React use gesture. And if we just go back and have a look at the API, so the argument to this is a callback, which receives. So here they're using down and delta, and we can look at the whole set of what we've got here, and we want the y position, so the scrolling position, which is going to it's going to be passed into us as xy in an array. If we destructure xy out of here, then we want to set y. Remember, we need to be setting an object because that's how that was how it was set up in Album. And then we want the value for this is xy, which is an array 1, to give the y out of it. I'm also going to just put a logging line in here, which is going to probably kill performance, but it's going to be really helpful for seeing what's going on. And then if we go back to our React use gesture documentation, so it needed an animated.div, and then we just pass y to it. So let's take this. So our tracks container is our overflow y scroll. So we've used bind on that. At the moment it's an. We want it to be an animated div. That's how you can use style components with React Spring. The version from Render Property Universal, we just want the normal one. And now, if we go in this one, console, You can see that as we scroll, we're getting all of those variables being updated. And it started off small, then we scrolled down, it got big, and then we went up a bit again, and it got smaller again. So we know which way the Y scroll is working. Now that we've got that number, we get rid of the console log. That's going to give us better performance, not trying to do that. So we're now going to apply our functionality to some of this, to apply our Y value to some of the animations. So the first one we'll start with is the cover image. So the first thing we need to do is pass the animated value. It's not just a number, it's an animated number, a value that wraps a number into the cover component. And so what we want from this component, from this, is the cover image container div, which is containing all of this. We want the opacity to go from 1 when we are when we're fully scrolled up, down to 0 once we're a bit further down. So I'm going to use the rack spring interpolate. The range of input values that we're going to have are 0, and the end of this is at what point do we want it to have completely disappeared. And we want it to have completely disappeared by the time we have scrolled as far as the collapsed small header. So we'll go from 0 to collapsed header height, and for that we want an output of, so 0, we want the opacity to be 1, and once we've got to the collapsed header height we want opacity to reach 0. And we don't want it to go past that either end because it's opacity and that doesn't make any sense. So opacity, just being a number, is now an animated value that's derived from Y. So to use that, rather than this just being a normal div, again we just need an animated div. So we'll get animated from React Spring, and let's give that a go. And we can see the image is now fading out as we move up and down. It's not completely disappearing in this one because we can't actually scroll far enough. But if I go to where I put it in a proper mobile setup, we can actually go far enough, and it looks as though it's disappearing in about the right place. Great. So that is the image. Next thing is that we want this text to disappear as we get to the top. So at the moment it just scrolls off. It fades. It looks like it fades out a bit because it goes behind the collapsed header that we've got temporarily, but we're going to get rid of that anyway, or going to animate that soon anyway. But next we'll just focus on getting that to disappear. So that text is within the scrollable section, so that's within content, which is already receiving Y. And that is in the expanded header, so he needs Y. And then if we look in expanded header, so we can see that here I set the, so for now I set the opacity to always be 1, which is why that text, which is on the div that's around the text, which is why that text doesn't fade out. first thing, as before, we need to, if we animate this, we want it to be an animated div. We need to get animated. And we are receiving it as a prop. So again, we'll just interpolate. So our input range, we'll leave for a second. Our output range is, so the first bit of our input range is going to be 0. So what do we want when we haven't scrolled down at all? And that's where we want the opacity to be 1. And then at some point we want the opacity to reach 0. And again, we're going to set it to be clamped so we don't go anywhere, don't go past 0 or 1. And the question next is, at what point do we want it to reach completely disappeared? So let's try the same point at which we have the image disappearing, which is the collapsed header height. Why is that not working? There we go, it's disappearing. Doesn't look quite right, looks like it disappears a bit too early. So let's try, rather than that, let's try at the expanded header height when we get there in our scroll. So we want it to have disappeared before it gets off the edge of the screen. So if we look at it on here, we can see that it's, you actually see it disappear off the screen. We want it to go a bit before that. So let's try getting it to go off twice as fast. Yeah, that looks quite nice. So it's not quite at the same, doesn't quite disappear at the same point as the image. It goes off a bit later, but it's looking quite nice. The other thing is we've also got this gradient, and if we look at the real version of this, the height of that gradient shrinks as it goes, which, because at the moment it's really hiding all of the image as it's on its way out. So this is why we've got this height being set to the expanded header height. Our gradient component, which again we just want it to be an animated div. If we're going to animate it, so the initial value that we've got when we are fully expanded is expanded header height. So let's interpolate again, and the output we want to run from expanded header height to 0, and we want to run that range from starting at 0 scroll position, and we will run that animation to expanded header height. And again, we don't want any bounce on any overrun on this. A negative height doesn't make much sense, so we can't get a negative scroll, so this is probably a bit pointless on this one. But if we go with that and check that we've got everything, yep, let's try that out. That looks a bit wrong. Looks like it's disappearing straight away, and that is because height, so opacity is just a number, but height actually needs a unit, So interpolate calls can be chained. So we will interpolate again from height value to putting it in pixels. Nope, still looking a bit strange. Let's have a look at this one, see what's going on. So if we leave it somewhere in the middle, we can investigate. So this component has already got height of 0. So there we have 300, which is what we expected as our start. And then we've instantly gone to 0. What's going on? And what's gone wrong is that I've used input, whereas it's actually range. Should probably, maybe would have found this if I'd been using TypeScript. And the default for input for range, if you don't specify anything, is 0 to 1, which is why it was instantly flicking as soon as we started scrolling. So if we try that, so I think the gradient bit is quite subtle. Doesn't add too much, but it adds a bit. So next, let's look at this. Collapsed header that we've currently got being fixed as half opacity. So again, we're going to want to pass whine, and then if we're looking in, so collapsed header, we're now receiving y. So we can see the component that we've been playing with the opacity of already. Again, we need this to be an animated div, and get animated. And then this can be another interpolate. So the range, and we have the output values, and again we're going to just clamp it because opacities outside the range 0 to 1 don't make sense. So the range is going to start at 0 scrolling, and at that point we want 0 opacity, and it's going to go to some number, and at that point we're going to want 1 opacity. So again, we could do a bit of trial and error to work out where this point is. It's probably, if we look in our constants, I've got one extra constant defined that I haven't used yet, which is the header delta, which is the difference in height between the expanded one and the collapsed one. So let's try using that one. And straight away our header has disappeared, but we can see it's coming in a bit too quickly, a bit too early, because we don't want to see this line until it's got dark enough that we don't really see it. But apart from that, we've got, and we don't like the text looks okay. Let's have a look at the bigger one. There we go. We can still see the text changeover looks quite good. It looks okay, but the opacity of that black of this is definitely off. So if we want it to come in a bit later, we can extend that zero opacity a bit longer. So let's go with, let's just say 100 for now, and let's try 200 just for, see if that makes it looks any better. So we can now, doesn't come in until we've already got it. So that may be potentially coming in a little bit too late, or reaching higher opacities a bit too late. So let's try 150. So it comes in quite quickly now. I think that looks okay. It looks that we've got a big black gap here because the button's not in the right place yet, but we'll stick with 100 to 150 and start looking at how to move the button. So again, we just need to we want to send our scroll point through to the shuffle play component. And so we have two different movements to do for this one, so it's slightly more complicated. So before we start that, again, we want it to be an animated component. So we need animated. And we're receiving Y as our animated value in as a prop. So our scroll position for zero scroll, so when Y is 0, we're at the top, we already said is expanded header height minus half the button height. And then as we scroll down, the scroll number is in pixels and we want to move it up by the same number of pixels. So if we go for try and interpolate on this again, so our range is from 0 to, it's going to max out at the expanded header height. Once we've scrolled that far down, we're not moving it any further. And the output, so we want this. No, actually this isn't how we want to do it. So we are going to just map give a function that maps any given Y value to a new X value. So at 0 we want exactly the same as this, and then as we scroll down, so 10 pixels, so as the Y value reaches 10, we want the translate Y to be reduced by 10 pixels. So if we go with this, we should see, so it's lagging behind because we've currently got spring physics, but it does, if I leave it at any point, it does reach the right place. And if I go to the smaller one, then we see that it can actually go off the screen. So with our, apart from the springiness, which to be honest I actually quite like, we can make it a bit less silly by clamping it so it doesn't overrun, but we don't need to. But now we just need to work out how to stop it going off the screen. So if I just line it up here and go and actually look at the right element. So here we can see I've just lined it up as translate Y being 1 pixel. So if I could scroll a single pixel, then I'd have translate Y as 0. So that is when, and so we don't want it to go below, actually we don't want it to go below about there. And so to work out what height that is where at the point at which it's half overlapping with this collapsed header. So the collapsed header height we've got as a variable, and to be half overlapping we know that that is the half the height of the button. So the translate Y should be whichever is greater of whatever it needs to put it down here, and this sort of number to stop it going off the top. And we've got all of the power of JavaScript here. So what we can do is math.max, which lets us give 2 arguments, and it gives us the higher of the 2. So if we said 0 just to begin with, and I think for this one we're going to need this. So now we've still got the scroll, but then it stops at the edge. But we actually want it to stop a bit higher than the edge. So rather than 0, we want the collapsed header height minus half the button height. So then if we scroll, and it stops there. And at our collapsed header, we haven't got it quite perfectly positioned because our collapsed header has some padding, I think. So our collapsed header height is 64, but plus you've got 10 padding on either side. So we want to shift him down a bit. So now we see the center line of the button is nicely lined up with that. We could go off and do a bit more playing with this if we wanted to get that perfect, but I think that's good enough to show the animation. We can just see I don't quite like I think the spring physics are a bit too soft. So the opacity and the height of this gradient are also springy physics, but it's a lot less obvious with a gradient over something fading in opacity, and seeing spring physics on opacity is a bit tricky. So we've got 2 solutions for this. One would be stop using React Spring and just use animated to completely remove spring physics. The easiest one is probably just going to be to change the spring dampening to the spring config to make it just a bit sharper. So let's go and have a look at where we do that. So we need to pass a config into useSpring, and it actually just lives in this guy. And let's declare our config. Let's go and look at the React Spring docs. believe it's in this Common API section. Cool, and they actually have their own tension thing, so let's try maxing up the tension, minimizing the friction. Bit more friction. And we can just keep playing with this. So if I play with this, I've tried setting it to 500 and the friction to 35, and it's pretty direct. If I reduce the friction a bit, it's a little bit faster. Try about 20. Pretty direct, pretty quick. So let's try using that. So that was tension 500, friction about 20. Also it had the clamping option, so we can stop it vibrating. Which, let's stick it to clamp true and see what that does. So if we, it's a bit more shuddery, but it is more direct. And if we look at it on here, yeah, looks pretty good. I have one other idea for how to sort out this problem beyond the ones that I mentioned earlier. So we could have two versions of this button being rendered, one being part of the actual scrollable area and the other being in the fixed position, and then we could make it so that one appears at exactly the point where the other disappears as one goes past the other. And I might play with that. Just gonna see if I get some time, and I'll put that in a follow-up if that works nicely. That's all I've got for this video. Let me know if you appreciated it in the comments, or if there's anything else you'd like to see, and thanks for watching.